the perception that you're a flight risk, that you indicate because of your age that you're on the way out. What are your tips or tricks or strategies for how to remove yourself from the stereotype and maintain your high degree of candidacy?
When you're applying for a job and you're in your older years, it's important to show how dedicated you are to the long-term mission of a company, as well as your long-term career objectives there. If you indicate, hey, I'd love to join this company and I'm super excited about this particular role, because you want to tell them you want that role. Because the other aspect of this is a lot of people might have a biased thinking or a concern, especially if this is a step down in a career ladder for the applicant, that this is something that's just going to be a stepping stone and that they're going to peace out as soon as they get a better role, because it's a tough market out there, right? And so it's important to address that by saying, hey, I'm really stoked about this particular role, particularly if it's a step back. Explain why you're excited about that.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long, or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. There's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
So this whole idea that we know, we have the data that says, yeah, multi-gen teams, workforces, et cetera, are more productive, they're higher revenue, they increase shareholder value. All those things are 100% true. And so for the person who is, well, I'll say 90% true, for the person who is in a job search, and we are saying, yeah, like there is merit to your wisdom, there is all these amazing things. Here's my like $10 million question. How do we quantify it? Because we don't want to quantify it with age, right? Because it doesn't always, we don't want to say, oh, because I am 50, 60, now I have this, right? Because then it's kind of like,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that in and of itself is kind of like cost of entry. As you get older, you are becoming, your brain is crystallizing, things are happening, you're able to assess things a lot faster because of that experience. But what other metrics might we be able to use to our advantage, aside from like metrics from an actual case study?
Well, I would say that first of all, age doesn't necessarily correlate with experience because people pivot all the time. And certainly, for example, I work with younger Gen Z employees who help me with my social media and help me with my video editing and whatnot, and basically serve as sometimes my therapist somewhat as I try to do this random crazy social media podcast thing. And, these people have far more experience than I do in those things, and I learn from them constantly, right? So it doesn't necessarily correlate, but I would say with regard to having all of these decades of experience, you have things that you've achieved, right? So you can call on them. You don't have to say, I've done this for 35 years, right? In fact, I would urge you not to do that. Probably wouldn't help. And it also sounds a little, one of the stereotypes about older people is that they're stuck in their ways. So if you say, I've done this for 35 years, that probably sets off an alarm bell in someone who might have a slight age bias, thinking, oh, that person doesn't want to change or isn't open to new ideas or ways of moving fast or whatever, all those stereotypes, right? So I think when you consider that you've done a lot over the course of time, calling out specific examples of successes that you've had and also of misses, right? And what you've learned from them, that's important too. But like recognizing, taking age from a liability in the minds of the biased people who are interviewing you and looking at your resume, right, to an asset because of all of the incredible network connections you bring, all of the projects you have under your belt, all of the know-how. I think shifting that in your brain instead of coming into an organization and thinking, oh gosh, no one's going to like me because I'm older, or, I bet I can't get past this first initial phone screen because they're going to see that I'm, 70, those sorts of things. Like, we're human. Of course, we're going to think those things, but they can become a self-fulfilling prophecy and a death sentence to you if you go in with that mentality. So again, we talked about this earlier in how we shift ourselves to get to that sort of empowered point. It's hard, right? It's hard. But I think we really need to work on that shift, because if you come, it's like people pick up on that energy, right? And so, and I would also say it's very critical that you have equal respect for the person on the other side of the table. So if you are being interviewed by a brand new recruiter who's fresh out of college, who may not, really be able to vibe with you as much as you might hope, right? Make sure that you give them the according respect that they deserve in their role, and don't discount them because they've just started, or, think out of the gates things about them that are stereotypes, right? Like we can't do it back either. That's another important component. And at the end of the day, we're all humans. And if we can just have some empathy and respect for people who are in a different stage of life than we are, maybe different gender, maybe different race, like just be nice to people. It's going to help a lot, like a lot. And just connect as much as you can as another human, right? Like there's so much we can just connect on, I think.
So here we are, like we're pretending right now, like you and I were in an interview, right? And you just did a series on, how to spin this or how to talk about this in an interview question. It's not gonna come up in a very direct manner, but one of the questions that you posed was, where do you see yourself in the next 5, 10 years? Right? So that's one
Yeah.
question. But the question that's not being asked is the one that I really want to address is not where do you see yourself, but the perception that you're a flight risk, that you
Mm.
on some level are planning something for something that you haven't actually planned for in their
Mm.
eyes, right? That you indicate because of your age that you're on the way out. So how do you deal with some of these? What are your tips or tricks or strategies for how to more or less remove yourself from the stereotype and maintain your your high degree of candidacy? How are you seeing this, and what are you doing, whether it's in tech or any of the other hybrids of tech?
So, with regard to trying to dispel those notions that people might have when they see you and you appear that you might be in your 50s or your 60s, and they have that mentality, oh my gosh, maybe they don't want to be here for very long. That's, I think, kind of a human thing, right? Because recruiters are looking to find employees who will be with the company for a long time. So, like, I get it. I get it. But the data actually shows that older employees stay longer at companies, which is, of course, hilarious. So, but this is a reality that people face, right? So, I think to the extent that is possible, when you're applying for a job and you're in your older years, which I put in air quotes for those of you who are not watching this, it's important to show how dedicated you are to the long-term mission of a company, as well as your long-term career objectives there, right? So if you indicate, hey, I'd love to join this company, Anytech or whatever it might be, right? And I'm super excited about this particular role, because you want to tell them you want that role. Because the other aspect of this is a lot of people might have a bias thinking, oh gosh, or a concern, oh gosh, especially if this is a step down in a career ladder for the applicant, that this is something that's just going to be a stepping stone and that they're going to peace out as soon as they get a better role, right? Because it's a tough market out there, right? And some people are taking, understandably, things that they might not have been all that jazzed about earlier, right? But so it's important to address that by saying, hey, I'm really stoked about this particular role, particularly if it's a step back. Explain why you're excited about that, right? Whatever you can come up with, which makes sense for your complete, your particular situation, like land that, stick that. But then, because also a lot of candidates, or excuse me, a lot of employers, sadly, I've had this confirmed by like big time people who've told me off the record, this is very true. And I'm like, actually, I think I'll cop to actually thinking that way too. But there's a bias against older workers who haven't necessarily risen through the career ladder, right? Where they're an
Mm-hmm.
IC, an individual contributor for many years, they're seen as like, why didn't they do more, right? Which is so unfair, because maybe you don't want to be the boss. Maybe you were the boss and it
Right,
sucked. Maybe you have to
right.
go take care of your aging parents. Maybe whatever. It doesn't matter. It's actually not their business. But there is that possibility too. So saying how you're going to stick the landing at the current job, how you're excited about that specific one, but also talking about what you would do growing into the next level of your career, whether maybe it's just like mentoring other people on the team. You could say that if you don't actually feel comfortable saying, I want to be the boss someday, right? But showing that you are thinking long term and talking specifically about the long term plans for that company, I think that's the best way I can offer people that I have come up with to address that. Certainly there may be other great ways, but that was the one that I could think of most. And yes, there might be some people who will be a little bit put off if they're concerned that you're going to try and take their job or something. So you got to read the room. Like there's not a, tried and true, like just absolute, there's no absolutes here, right? You have to look at each situation, but that's the way I would frame it. And just try to help yourself out. You, at the end of the day, you can't change how someone is going to perceive you completely, right? Like it is what it is. It's not something within your control. So you need to focus on what you can control. Don't get in your head, right? And just try to make it as little of an issue as you can. And if they have a problem with you, ultimately, let's be frank, if they don't like you because of your age, it's not the right place for you to be anyway, and their loss. So that's the mentality I also want people to think of. It's hard when they're like, I just need a job, but
Yeah. So one of the areas that I feel especially passionate about, since you nailed it from the very beginning, right? Ageism is one thing we will all have in common, no matter what, no matter when. I mean, it's just a fact of life. And
Mhm.
from my experience, some of the concerns that I have is not that we're getting older or that we're facing ageism, is that we equate ageism with either excuse or acceptance that we are not relevant. And so
Mm.
I'm particularly interested in hearing, like, we know that that is there, but on areas of maintaining relevance, what are things that are, in your eyes, and also as you represent part of the ageism community, what are some of the signals that will help to override or mitigate some of the perceptions around ageism, albeit relevance?
So, with regard to relevance, I mean, some of that, of course, is internalized ageism and concern. Like, I have that. I'm like, sometimes I think about walking into a tech company if I were to go work full time there again. And it's almost like I was thinking about this the other day. Like, it feels like Mean Girls. You know that movie Mean Girls where the mom
Or-
is like, hey guys, I'm cool. I'm the cool mom. Like, I almost feel like I would be in there trying to prove something, which is like really awful to think about, but it's true. So
Right.
there's that, like, because we're humans, we want to be part of a group, and if the group is young, white, and male, like, you're gonna try and relate to them in some way, which is not authentic. It's definitely not bringing your authentic self to work, which is something
Sure.
that is actually sadly quite a privilege. But so the relevance thing, I think, is a very human thing. When it comes to the workplace, skills, reskilling, upskilling, making sure that you're, you know, taking advantage of any learning that you can and showcasing that to people. I mean, I had a guest on my show. He was a past colleague of mine and I adore him. His name's John Parisi. He's 64 now. And when I met him, I was 29 and he was whatever, 50. So I guess I'm like, I should be able to do that math right now. He's 52 or something. And I had him on the show and I opened the show with an apology to him, which was like, oh my gosh, I was the jerk who was like, hey, old dude, like, and look at how karma came back for me, right? I'm now with you. And so we had a big laugh about it. But he said something on the episode that I thought was really great, which was essentially that AI is, everyone's saying it's new. Of course, it's been development for forever, but its application and its societal prominence is new. And he's like, I view AI as a 63-year-old dude as like a great equalizer, because the reality is anyone at any age can go learn all they can about AI and be a huge asset to a company. And that's just brilliant. It's so true. And so he was very cognizant that he wanted to, and he always, I was laughing too. I was like, dude, John, you were always schooling me on what to do. I was like that young 30-year-old buck and I didn't know anything. Like you made websites like with Wix in 2 seconds. And I was like, what? How do I do that? He just was constantly, disproving any of those dumb stereotypes about older people, right? But it's making sure that you are keeping track of what's important in your industry is probably one of the better ways to stay relevant, quote unquote, and help dissuade any of those like nagging, creeping thoughts about your ability to just like hang with everybody, right? It's just showing up in that way.
Right. I appreciate that it's not about try hard, right? Like that's icky. That's not you. You don't have to be somebody, some hipster, in order to be, relevant in your own
Right.
skin and also in your own age. One of the
Right.
areas that I always support wholeheartedly, of course, is LinkedIn. Right?
Mm.
LinkedIn is a very, yes, I'm sure that there are biases and across every dynamic, every gender, but that is an area that I will forever say, you can participate, jump into any conversation whatsoever for the most part, especially if you're on an audio event. Like, the stage is just as much yours as it is anybody else's. You can write anything you want on your content. You can participate in thought leadership. You can really exercise your voice and your point of view. And heads up, companies pay more for that. They love that. They love that. So, don't say, "Ooh, I hate social media." Not to say change your mind, but I'm saying maybe open up the aperture and understand that there can be a real advantage to using it in a way, whether it's for your job search, your career, building your network, maybe your startup, as your next audience. Because let's face it, it's over a billion people, and chances are there somebody there is the person that you want to get in touch with. After all, that's how I met you.
Yeah.
But
I think it was from one of your brilliant posts that I met you. So, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, here we are. We've been talking about ages, and we've been talking about all different ins and outs. And my last question to you, Maureen, if you could pick just one, we're waving a magic wand, or we're like, whatever, knocking our shoes together, going, okay, it's done. Which is the first stereotype or phrase that you wish was eliminated in the world, in careers and tech, about ageism? What is the one that you want, like, goodbye?
You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Bye.
Mm,
Bye.
goodbye.
That's my number one. It's
That's your number
ridiculous.
one.
It's wrong. I mean, it's absurd. It's
It is
patently
absurd.
false.
Yeah.
And hopefully
And it's
Indeed knows all about how wrong it is as well when they were
right.
like,
I
hey,
mean,
stop learning and start training your successor. What? Like, also, by the way, no one has saved enough money for retirement. We're all living to like, well, not all of us, but many people are living into their 90s, 100. Like, this, we got two adulthoods now if we're lucky. If we're lucky, because aging is living. If we're lucky.
mm,
Change
on
that
that
mindset,
note,
right?
aging is living. Oh my goodness. We
It's
need
true.
t-shirts. You know me,
We
I'm like
do.
always like a
Well,
t-shirt
I
whore. I
love the
mean, I just
t-shirt you're wearing. Big
gotta
into
like
it.
gotta get a good t-shirt. So
I
please,
need to get some
please,
good
please,
t-shirts.
everyone, make sure, number one, follow Maureen Clough, because that
Cool.
link is right below.
Thank you.
Number two, make sure that you listen to her podcast. It is like up there. It's a big deal. And she's a big deal too. And
Oh,
so, what I mean by that is, this is a way to also really, really understand, hot off the press. And she is actually pressing buttons, and I love it, what is happening and where that band-aid is being ripped off. So definitely check out her podcast, It Gets Late Early. And then lastly, we're going to ask you, if you love this podcast, if you think that we're doing something that is deeply meaningful on ageism, or things in your career that you are just like, yeah, man, I'm loving it, please write a review. This is so important to us. We are growing. We are currently in the top 1%. We're not as good as Maureen, but we're working
yep.
on it. And the
Yes, you
point
are.
is that we need every single one of you to help deal with this issue around ageism, because I'm going to say what Maureen was too kind not to say, although she's very outspoken. Please do not be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. So do not reinvest in old methodologies and then get pissed off that ageism is there. Deal with it, know that it's there, and know also that we are here to empower you and also to equalize the playing field, not just for men, not just for women, but across the board. So we're going to say goodbye right now. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for being here, and thank you for being such a wonderful audience. And thank you, Maureen. And this is like the beginning of a beautiful thing.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Lauren. I love what you're doing. And yes, everybody go subscribe to Lauren's podcast and mine if you want.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next career blast in a half. Most of all, thank you for you.